Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second installment of my new segment, So You Want to Make Comics. And when I first started this, I thought I could get some comic book people to come on and talk about the craft and what they love about it. But I didn't think I was going to get such big names right off the start, right from the start. We had Mike Barron, and if you've been following me for a while, you've also heard my interview with Val Merrick. But to have the likes of Chuck Dixon on the show as soon as I get going. Chuck, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. This will be fun.
Well, definitely. Well, I'm really excited because, I mean, literally years of some of the best Batman comic book reading I've ever done is been under when it's been under your watch, and you are also the creator of Bane, who made it into cinema and was quite a popular movie too. Well, actually twice. One time where it was not done so well, and another time
Yeah,
where it was a different version, but it was definitely memorable. And you've published under smaller comic companies like Epic and First Comics, IDW. You've done stuff for Marvel. I mean, Conan the Barbarian. And you've got, I believe, your latest book that you're working on is Avalon, correct?
yeah, through Arcaven. So some superhero 12 issue deal.
Nice. And Arcaven, now that is, you have your own imprint at the moment. Is Arcaven your own imprint, or am I thinking of something else?
No, I'm just part of the Arcaven imprint. I'm doing Avalon and Alt Hero Q for them as well.
Okay, and they also have some other. So I believe it's you, Mike Barron, and then another gentleman are using that to publish.
That's Cautionary Comics.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, I work for like most comic book professionals now. We're all working for like half a dozen comic companies at once.
Yeah, and it gets tough to follow because we're kind of going through a I want to call it a kind of a renaissance at the moment, where we have a situation where a lot of readership has dropped off from what we call the big two, Marvel Comics and DC Comics, but a lot of professionals have found kind of the confidence in the in crowdfunding or in self-publishing, because technology has allowed us to kind of do these things where we couldn't do it before. So there's really a lot going on at the moment, and I feel a lot to be excited about. It's
Yeah, it's the I call it the garage band era of comics.
That's a good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is? I know you've entered into this game. You've thrown your hat into this game. When did you first kind of realize that this is something that you wanted to be a part of?
Well, kind of all caught up with me. I mean, I got, kind of ostracized at Marvel and DC and spent some time in the wilderness working for the smaller independents and writing novels. And then this groundswell of other guys who have been ostracized by the industry sort of rose up, and they started, crowdfunding, doing their own funding, doing their own self-publishing, putting their own deals together. And right now, I think the top five highest paid people in our business are all self-funded.
Yeah, that's really an encouraging and amazing thing, and it's not something that's obviously going to happen for everybody who crowdfunds. I know some people struggle with it, but it certainly has set a precedent, not a precedent, a precedent. I I have a cat in my lap. Sorry, animals are a thing around here.
I mean, the self-funding thing sort of married to the idea that, we got sort of shoved out of the industry, but at the same time, hundreds of thousands of readers walked away as well. They weren't happy with what was being published as much as the publishers weren't happy with us. So that's kind of our audience. We all kind of got pushed away from comics at the same time, both the creators and the readers.
It's an interesting kind of dichotomy as well, because in a way, it's like if you were to take Stephen King properties in the world of novels and their readership and say, hey, we're writing, The Shining 2, but it's by this other writer, this people wouldn't be interested. It's the name Stephen King that they know what they're going to get because they know what he brings to the table as a writer. So I imagine that over the years, that readership isn't just based on, hey, we love Batman. It's, hey, we love it when Chuck Dixon writes Batman, or, you know, you're not the only person that they love that writes Batman, but they know what they're going to get. They know you understand the character. So there's kind of been a phenomenon as well, without mentioning any names, because I'm not here to stir up trouble, but there are writers that come on and people go, this person just does not understand this character. So when we're reading it, we're not getting the Batman we love, but we know when Chuck Dixon is writing, we're going to get the Batman we love. How do you kind of understand a character like that? What kind of gives you, what informs your decision for writing characters? And is there an audience connection that you're aware of, or do you just feel like you've got a grasp on this character and therefore you should get the job?
Well, comics is a collaborative medium. I mean, it's not all about me. I mean, every writer has their idea of Batman, but when they come to do it for a living and get hired, you know, to do the job of writing Batman, they have to, well, in the past, they had to conform to some kind of a framework so that everybody shared the same understanding of the character. And the editors back in the day were the stewards. They were the ones that made sure the character remained consistent and didn't violate things from the past, didn't violate continuity to any degree that couldn't be repaired later. And you know, so when I got hired on the Batman, I was handed, you know, like a 12-page essay written by Denny O'Neil.
Oh, wow.
Laying out, you know, what was expected of me and what was expected of the character. And then as you move along, you know, I relied on Denny and Archie Goodwin's guidance, and a lot of my run on Batman, I relied on Graham Nolan, my artist's guidance, because I was a big Batman fan, but there's no bigger Batman fan than Graham. And he knew everything about it. He's a Batman historian. And so, you know, you listen to everybody. You don't just go, well, I'm going to write it any damn way I please. Well, I'm sorry. The franchise has been around, what, 80 years? I mean, it's not yours. You are babysitting, for lack of a better term. And someone will take on the project after you. You have to leave it so it's not all broken. And, you know, so
Did I lose you?
back in the day. So you wound up with a more consistent product.
Oh, sorry. We lost connection for just a few moments there.
Okay.
But no, I understand what you're talking about. I'll just leave that in because I know the audience will understand. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a very interesting phenomenon because ultimately comic books is an entertainment medium, and there have been some great works of art that have come out of comic books, but you know, how do you know in terms of when you're creating your own property, what you know of the audience? What do you give them to entertain them, and how do you know where you push the boundaries to give them something different or to surprise them, but also not pulling the rug out from under them?
Well, I mean, to the extent I think about the audience, I mean, I basically write comics I would want to read. And if it's not something, if I get assigned something I'm new to, say SpongeBob SquarePants, I'm going to target, you know, an imaginary precocious 10-year-old, you know, and think, what would they want to read, you know, or what did I like to read when I was 10, or what would I find funny or entertaining, and then you just apply your craft. I mean, I apply everything I've learned about writing comics and to making the comic as engaging and fast-paced, and whatever requirements there are, I throw in there. If it has to be suspenseful or dramatic, or if it has to be funny, or if it has to be scary, you know, and you know, it's just a matter of applying the craft, and that's a lot of what I see lacking now, because we got a lot of what I call tourists, people coming from outside from other media, and they think that writing comics is easy, and it's not. It requires a certain part of your brain to be developed. And it's a language. Comics are a language all their own. You have to learn. And I see a lot of that lacking. Uh, I think that's part of the frustration with the people who are self-funding. They're really good at what they do. They just want the freedom to do it without gatekeepers. And the current crop of gatekeepers, I don't know. They don't seem to know what they're doing.
Now this is very interesting to me because, as I mentioned to you before, I work in entertainment, but I work more in movies. I'm a big fan of comic books, and once a lot of people that I work with found out about that, they kind of have the same thing. Oh, I've got this movie script that I would like to turn into a comic book. We can find someone to draw it, and then it'll become popular, and then we can sell it as a movie. And my response is always, the true comic book fans, they see right through that. They can spot a movie pitch dressed up as a comic book from a mile away. And, another issue is that they often don't understand that language that you're talking about, where there's a certain way to structure comic books. You can't just put your script into pictures and put it on a page and have it be as interesting as how a director would make it into a movie, and vice versa. If you try and take a comic book story and turn it directly into a movie frame for frame, they're not storyboards.
Right.
You're going to have to figure out the story has to change to fit the medium. One of the things that I was wondering was, for you as a writer, when you first got started, what was kind of your first aha moment as a comic book writer that you realized, this is how a comic book is written, and now dogs are barking?
Well, first of all, to address the movie thing, I mean, I've adopted quite a few movie treatments into graphic novels, to help sell the movie and get investors. But the people who come to me to do that understand that I'm going to have to alter the work to make it work as a comic. It's, like you said, it can't just be a series of storyboards. And, so, I've done quite a bit of that, and I appreciate the work, and, it's kind of cool, and it's kind of neat as an experiment for me to see if I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times to make it work as a comic, it usually entails moving scenes around, because comics aren't paced the same way movies are. Comics are an immediate experience. You have to have something going on all the time. So I would have to emphasize things that maybe they weren't going to emphasize in the movie to make it work as a comic. And that's all fair game, because if it doesn't work as a comic, it's not going to engage anybody to think about it as a movie. If it's just a bunch of dry pictures, it's not. So I've really got to treat it as a comic only, and approach it that way. As far as big revelations coming into the business, I think the biggest shock I had was when I found out what comic books were popular and which ones weren't. Back in the 70s, when I was a fan and I was trying to break into the business, you could go up and get interviews at DC, never at Marvel. You were never allowed at Marvel. But DC would hold once a week interviews on Wednesdays, just before lunch. And they would have two assistant editors come in and crush your dreams. Basically tell you that, you didn't have a chance. The business was in terrible shape. And they asked us what we thought the #1 best-selling comic in America was. And when we told them, they would just laugh, because it was the fan favorite comic book, but it was usually one that was selling very poorly and facing cancellation. And I found out that, DC Comics, the #1 selling comic at the company at the time was Jonah Hex. Wow. Jonah Hex was outselling Batman and Superman by quite a margin. And that was an eye-opener. And that was when I realized you can't specialize in one genre. You got to be ready, because I just wanted to write comics. I didn't care. I love the characters, but I didn't care what characters I wrote, as long as I was working in the medium. And that's when I really thought, well, you can't be a specialist. I'm really going to have to generalize and learn how to write all different kinds of comics.
What kind of comics, or what kind of stories in general? Because I should mention at this point that you're also a novelist. And I'm currently reading your zombie novel, Gomers, which, by the way, I'm just going to mention, has already given me nightmares. And I'm not even kidding about that. But what kind of stories, like if you could just have the luxury of writing whatever you wanted all the time, what kind of stories would that be? What attracts you?
They would probably always be Westerns.
Oh,
I love Westerns.
that's yeah, that's interesting. It's funny because I went on a Clint Eastwood kick a few years ago. I had never actually been into westerns, but James Hudnall got me into the Clint Eastwood Fistful of Dollars movies,
Ah, okay.
and he was very excited about those, and they really kind of changed my perspective on storytelling, because it was interesting watching those because they were very visual,
Right.
and they were very reliant on kind of building tension through pacing and not a lot of dialogue. Um, so in terms of comic books, is there a method of pacing that you have that maybe is all your own, or do you feel like there's a pretty standard way that a comic book is paced, and you have to kind of stick to that?
Well, you have to keep things moving. Um, I recently posted something that every page in a comic book is a threshold, and as you turn each page, you should be introduced to a you know new things to engage you, new things to delight you, because every page counts. No, every page in a comic book should make sense on its own, out of context. And so you have to think about things like establishment panels. Does the first panel let the reader know where we are in the story, geographically and time wise? The final panel on each page has to give them a reason to turn the page. Either an unfinished phrase or a surprise, or some kind of suspense element that makes them turn the page, and that's every page.
I
So
Yeah, I love that about comic books. I think it was Stan Lee I think I heard Stan Lee say this, or read that he said this, and it was something like it's units of thought in threes. Like the first panel sets up the thought, the second panel moves it along, and the third one concludes it and gives you some sort of cliffhanger, some reason to jump to the next one. And if you're dealing in a 9-panel grid, each one of those 3 segments operates in the same, and every 3 pages with a page turn operates. And then you could even go so far as every segment of 8, which breaks down to 3 segments in a 24-page comic book. So I always kind of approached it in that sense, that it was like some sort of weird rule of 3, beginning, middle, and end all the way through. And like you said, everything has to constantly be not reestablished in a form of redundancy, but like you said, anybody could open a comic to any page and have some sort of context. I believe it was a Donald Duck comic that you used as an example for that. So
yeah, I used Donald Duck because Carl Barks, who was the most famous Donald Duck comic book writer and artist, basically invented comic book writing. He's the first guy to really look at comic book writing as an art on its own and figure out how to make it work. So he didn't look upon it as just an extension of comic strips. He looked upon it as an entirely different writing form, and we all follow, whether you know it or not, whether or not you even heard of Carl Barks. We all follow his model because that's what every writer in comics looked at to say, oh, that's how it's done.
And I really feel like when you ignore that, and I do see a lot of comic book writers these days ignore that entirely, you feel it, you know, and even if you're just a comic book reader and you have no idea what it takes to write a comic book, you still you're not stimulated by it, that you feel that something is missing.
No, you're not engaged. I mean, I see so many comics that will begin, and the first pages are 2 people talking. And generally, they're 2 people, you don't know who they are, and you don't know what they're talking. Something more engaging than that. I remember when I was a kid, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee excelled at cold openings for their Fantastic Four issues. They would always open on something that didn't really relate to the story to come, but it always got you into the story immediately. I mean, it might be, Ben and Johnny chasing a dinosaur through the Baxter building, just to make you go, well, why is this happening? just to draw you into the story.
Okay, so for the audience, we had to switch over because we were having some trouble with Skype, but I had asked Chuck what he thought was his most memorable, what he felt was one of the most memorable comic book openings, and also what he was pleased with as a comic book opening he wrote. And you'd started with Alan Moore and A Birthday Cake for Superman.
Yeah. There was a story, I think it was in an Action Comic Annual. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But it's an Alan Moore story, and Batman and Robin show up to give Superman a birthday cake, and it seems so retro and fun and so un-Alan Moore. And of course, what follows is a tremendous story. And I mentioned the cold openings that Kirby would do. And John Byrne, it was always great with cold openings. There's a really famous one it's just a close-up of Galactus saying, "I'm dying." Why wouldn't you read the rest of that story? You'd have to read it. And of course, back in the Silver Age with particularly Superman, they were guilty of this. The shock opening that sometimes had nothing to do with the story or was solved through some contrivance. Jimmy Olsen has turned into a werewolf, or Lois Lane is now a witch, or Superman can't remember his name, and that would, everybody says, agrees that those stories are dumb, but what they had going for them was you had to finish them. You had to find out how that happened. You had to find out what happened next.
Will Batman win the beach blanket dance-off?
There you go.
Or
there you go.
Trying.
Well, why wouldn't you read that?
And how about you? Is there anything where you had an epiphany or something that you felt really kind of launched a great story? And of course, with something that you open, you always have to, make sure that the audience gets it resolved at the end. So you're not just opening to grab someone's attention, you're opening with a situation that you're telling the reader, this is the problem we're working on in this issue.
Yeah. I have a better memory for everybody else's work, not my own. So I really can't think of one off the top of my head.
Well,
that works. I work hard on openings. It sounds silly. I can't start writing until I have my opening. Obviously, you can't write, but I can't even start thinking about the rest of the story until I know exactly how it's going to begin.
Well, that's very interesting because it's very easy to, and this is for me when I'm writing as well, it's very easy to kind of imagine something you've written as an opening as being kind of poetic or interesting, but you also have to kind of remember, is this interesting to just me, or because sometimes you present it to someone and you realize that you're asking them to get through something before they get to the good stuff, and that's really just a bad way to start things off.
Yeah. Well, they there used to be a byword in comics to treat every comic as if it's a person's first comic, and to write in mind for not only, new comic readers, but someone entirely new to the medium, and how do you grab them? So you really have to go broad, and, a lot of times use, either shock elements, whatever you can, whatever trick gets them to that next page. Because, you also, back before Diamond Solicits, back when you didn't know what comics were coming out, a lot of times you'd flip to the first page to see if you wanted to buy it. And so that first page sold you or it didn't.
One of the interesting things about comics, too, this is something that I remember Eddie Campbell pointing out, which was, he mentioned those covers where it was some situation that was grabbing your attention. And he said, well, one of the drawbacks of comics is that you can flip through the entire thing and instantly know the whole story. I don't know if I agree with that entirely, because you still have to, you can kind of see little things going on here and there, but I think the real magic of a comic is engaging it panel for panel, like we were talking about before, really getting sucked into the rhythm of turning that page and going from panel to panel.
No, absolutely. If you were reading a prose novel, obviously you could jump to the end. Who wants to do that? I mean, I think one of the things that was actually helped me study comics was that I was nearsighted, but wasn't diagnosed as nearsighted till I was 7, and so I spent most of my time as a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old reading comics with them held right up to my nose so I could see them. And in a lot of ways that taught me things because I literally couldn't see even the end of the page coming. So I think I intuited from that, or sort of by osmosis, how these things are told, these series of static pictures to form a story.
Well, there's something else about comics that's kind of been interesting at the moment, and that is, again, kind of going back to what's been losing readers, but there's kind of this new phrase that I see a lot, and it's in movies as well, which is we're going to subvert expectations, which really kind of translates into we're going to take the things you enjoy about this thing and not give them to you. What are your thoughts on kind of what people are calling subversion of expectations? Is it something that, is good in a story? Or are they just using the phrase wrong? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think you have to give the audience what they want, but not in the way they expected it. You have to exceed their expectations, to my mind, and especially in comics. I mean, comics are, let's face it, lowbrow entertainment. But when they're done well, they're great lowbrow entertainment. They're fun and engaging, and as I said before, an immediate experience, unlike any other medium. I mean, you watch a movie and you don't go, I don't like this frame. I don't think I'll watch it anymore. Or that scene didn't do it for me. But comics, it's like if we don't grab you on every page and hold you and make you go to the next page, you'll simply stop reading. We don't have the advantage of music and special effects and Scarlett Johansson and all these things to make you keep watching something, to keep you engaged. We've only got that page. We've only got these images and these words, and and that's what a lot of people don't understand. I hate to keep beating the drum, but every page is important, and has to be thought of as a separate entity that's part of the greater whole.
What are some story elements that you find will kind of lose people? At least I'm sure you're not sitting there with people as they read your comic, but I'm sure you get feedback. I mean, I've certainly seen things where there's a cool comic and then somebody else will take it over and they're like, we're gonna do this thing, but you realize they're not really writing it because they're interested in that character. They're just kind of I kind of equate it to I don't know if you play any instruments, but I used to play guitar. No. But I would play a song on a guitar for someone, and I'd have like a few friends around or something to listen to the song, and then someone else like, oh, I play guitar too a little bit, and can I see the guitar? And then they would grab the guitar and they would just painfully try and pluck through a few chords and go, oh wait, no, that wasn't it. And it's just like I equate it to like seeing that someone else has generated something exciting and then wanting to kind of take it over, but not having anything to offer to it, but they still have kind of monopolized it, because good luck getting that guitar back from them until they've finished plucking through whatever they're trying to do. And, so you kind of get that sense that there's stuff they want to do, but really what they've done is they've taken that thing as like a vehicle for attention for them, and they've just kind of ended up being a bummer. I realize I'm griping at this point, but I think it's something.
No, but it's an apt criticism, especially in this medium where these franchises are decades old. I mean, our grandparents and great grandparents were around when these things first came out, and when I got Batman, when I got to write Batman, which I never thought I'd ever get to do, my thing was, I can't screw it up, and I'm working in the shadow of all of these tremendous talents, and in some cases I'm working with some of these talents. I'm working with Denny O'Neil, I'm working with Archie Goodwin, and I can't let these guys down. And I thought, I've got to have their respect, the respect of my peers, and I've got to make sure I do a good job here, during my time on this character. And it really wasn't about making Batman mine or anything else. And of course you bring something of your own to it. And everybody, you should have a wish list in your head of stories. Whoa, I wish Batman would do this or do that. But not take the character and purposely deconstruct it or try to find some new facet no one else has found, because no one else is going to find a new facet of Batman. You have to emphasize what's already there, not alter it. You also have to let people that came before you inform your work. Punisher was a relatively new character, and I wanted to work on the Punisher. I campaigned to work on the Punisher. But when I got the Punisher, he was informed by other people who'd written him before me, particularly Mike Barron. Mike Barron put into focus a lot of things about Frank Castle that I used every time I wrote the character. I wasn't reinventing him. I wasn't interested in changing him. I loved him just the way he was. And I think too many times, writers come on and they want to make their mark. And, it's not about you.
Yeah, I find that there's certainly been instances recently, and again, you can see the fan reaction is not very positive. Sales go down. People take to the internet, and some of them are just complaining, but others are, they're intelligent. They're going, this is why this isn't working.
Right.
Or even if it's good sometimes. And this is another thing. You can write a good Batman story or a good any kind of story that it's well done, it's compelling, but it's inappropriate for the character, and it will get...
Oh, absolutely. I used to argue against that stuff when I was up in the offices, when I had juice and influence. I remember a story where I happened to be in the offices, and they asked me to sit in on a conference call with a writer who was calling in, and his idea was that he was going to have a story where Batman reveals himself to Commissioner Gordon that he's Bruce Wayne. And it was all for the purposes of one story. And they were all for it. And I said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Because that's a part of Batman's continuity that everyone understands. Even if you've never read a Batman comic book, Commissioner Gordon doesn't know who Batman is. And you can use all the arguments in the world as to why he should know, but you have to leave it alone. It doesn't make sense to change it, particularly for one story, and once you've changed it, you can never change it back.
That's having the person go like, oh, let me try and play a song on your guitar.
Yes, yes.
No, I can entirely relate, and I've personally experienced it because I've written back in my 20s. I had a comic that was geared towards the goth punk scene, and I had a friend who was always kind of, they liked it and it was getting popular, but then it was like, hey, why don't we do a story where one of your characters has a horrible illness and they have to cope with that? And I'm like, at the time I was young, I was like, okay, but I could never quite jive with it. Like, why don't I feel happy about this? And now that I'm older,
Right.
I realize it's because that wasn't what I created those characters for. But
Right.
this person wanted to tell these kind of stories, and I already had the characters established and going. And, even though he was a good writer and they were interesting stories, it just didn't jive because it's like, hey, I was playing the songs. Like,
Yeah.
Well,
and some people come to stories with an agenda, and it doesn't have to be a political agenda. I remember an artist I used to work a lot with. He would always try to get in on the writing side of it, which is fine. I'm fine working with an artist as long as you've got good ideas. Mm-hmm. and his idea was always to explore a character's background, and it was always the same thing. They were angry at their parents for some reason, and which I guess was him working something out. But it was like, I don't want to write the character that way.
Yeah, and this is there's always I noticed that too. Is several people that I've worked with they kind of want to explore their hang-ups on the page. And, I think that there's stories that can be created for that. But again, right now in the comic book industry, that seems to be, like I said, it gets very political. But I think even outside of the politics, it really isn't about the politics. It's about people who feel like this is a place to just kind of air whatever their grievance is, and the fact that they do that and then they get rejected just makes them more angry and more wanting to spite people because their grievances are getting rejected. Well,
the thing is, I mean, we say, well, it's political, but that's only because today everything is political. Literally, the air we breathe is political. Everything is political. I mean, these would be emotional issues 30, 40 years ago, but now they're a cause. And it's like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in this one-tone, emo comic where you're basically upset about, your childhood and playing it out with these established superhero characters.
Yeah, or using them to be passive-aggressive to make a point to, some person that you argue in your head with all the time.
Yeah. I'll show you, Grandpa.
Yeah.
For not taking me on the roller coaster. I'll have Superman beat up an old guy. It's like, okay. But I don't want to read that.
Yeah, neither does anyone else. I think this, I really kind of, and again, when I was younger, I hung out with people who were very jaded about comic books, and I feel like I missed out on a lot because, it was like, oh, this comic book is, postmodern, exploring this or that, and it's like, we don't do superhero comics, and I found that I missed out on a lot of great stuff because I was kind of taught this this kind of pretentious mindset, and it was like, and I think it's a young person thing as well. I mean, I got into I got into comics because I loved the Aliens and Terminator franchise, and there was like the comic book rack at Thrifty's when I get an ice cream had like, oh, I can get more Terminator and Aliens stories off of these, and then when I ran out of those, I was kind of going into, I explored superheroes a little bit, but then I became an angsty teenager, and there was Sandman and
right.
Vertigo, and so I thought like, oh, these are edgy, but I kind of rejected a lot of stuff that, coming back to later. And I have boxes full of back issues now where I'm just like, I can open anyone up, and even the ones that I thought weren't that good at the time have an air of quality to them that just gets ignored. Not all the time, but I can pretty much count on a comic, even with some of the worst comics from the 80s or early 90s, still being entertaining and engaging in some way. So
well, no, they knew their craft back then. I mean, editors wouldn't let you get away with stuff. You had to write it, at least with a modicum of an understanding of the language of comics, which I see missing now. But there was a tutelage then. I mean, the editors would, see you along on things like word balloon placement, things like that. Or you can't put all this on one page. And of course the artists would have a say as well.
You want me to draw what?
Yeah. It's like, what are you, crazy? I remember once going to an artist studio, a buddy of mine, and he said, what do I do? What do I do with this? And it was the opening page of the story, and panel one was this futuristic city described in excruciating detail with, flying vehicles and over, just huge skyscrapers and all this craziness. And panel two was closer in on the city. And panel three was closer still. And I said, I want you to draw this thing 3 times. And he says, well, what do I do? I said, just draw a splash page.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work with his storytelling. I mean, the hell with his storytelling. You've got to finish this in one day, to make your rent.
And this, especially there's a page rate, not a detail rate for the.
Exactly. I said, if I handed you a page like that and you turned it into a splash, I'd say fine. Who cares?
Well, not only
as
that,
long as it works,
My first response would be like, you're directing camera moves, and
exactly. And there again, we come back to the tourists, people from other mediums who don't understand how this one works.
Yeah, they want to kind of move you through the panels as if they're directing a camera, and I've directed a movie, and so I understand camera moves very well, but it is very much a product of the development of that particular medium.
Yeah, I mean, a comic book doesn't move. It just does. It's a static picture.
It's very interesting because the comic book nearly engages all of your senses through the one sense, through your eyes. It's, you know,
Right.
it's what I love about it, and this is the same thing as, you could say this about books too, but books are essentially, you know, you're reading symbols on a page and making the pictures move in your head. But with
Right.
a comic book, you're getting sight and sound, and you know, it doesn't require electricity unless you're reading it on a device. But I don't think
Right.
it, you know, I think you kind of, something is detracted from a comic book when you read it on a screen.
Yeah, it's not the same experience. I'm sure generationally that'll change, but yeah,
Yeah.
I got to be holding a comic book.
But a comic book is you know, something that is you know, it comes alive when you engage it, which I think is something that's very remarkable, and it does it in a way that, like I said, it kind of simulates a lot of your senses, where a book is a little bit different, and a book has its own trappings that have developed over, you know, centuries of writing them. So something else I want to jump over to, though, which is one of my most memorable experiences reading one of your stories was after the death of Robin, after they did the "Will Robin Live or Die" thing. You were put in charge of kind of introducing us. I think he'd already been introduced in the main comic books, but Robin got his own series where he kind of went off, like Batman sent him off to train.
Right.
And that's kind of taking a new character, but he's still also in the world of Batman. What was it like developing that character, and were the holographic covers your idea?
No, none of that stuff was my idea. Don't blame me. Yeah, I was happy with you buying the comic just one time. So, but yeah, I mean, Denny O'Neil kind of, like I said, I never thought I'd ever write Batman, and Denny O'Neil kind of reached out for me because he had read my Airboy stuff, and he liked the way I handled a younger character, that I didn't try to make it too hip or slangy or trendy or cool.
Mm-hmm.
I just wrote him as a young character with all of the foibles of a younger character, and he liked that, and he brought me on board. And I was quite honest with him. You know, I never say yes to a project, no matter how big it is, you know, unless I feel I can contribute. And I said, well, I've never really liked Robin as a character. and he explained why. You know, again, I had my fanboy bubble burst again. You know, he said that every time they listened to the fans and made Batman a loner without Robin, he says the sales would plummet. He said the readers, whether they knew it or not, they wanted Robin, and he said it was important to bring Robin back, especially after the Jason Todd debacle, and he and Alan Grant had pretty much taken Marv Wolfman's creation of Tim Drake and continued on with it. And built him into more of a character. But now it was my turn. What kind of a Robin was he going to be? And after Denny explained to me the importance of Robin and everything else, I agreed to do the project. And then a few days later, presented him with my idea for the miniseries and what kind of Robin this Robin would be. And I kind of summed it up that Tim Drake is going to be the kind of Robin that if he realizes he's in over his head, he'll call 911. And then he said he liked that because it was the polar opposite of Jason Todd. There was no arrogance here. Now, of course, in the stories, that would never happen. He would have to intercede before the cops got there. But he's Tim Drake. He's the hero, so of course he's going to do that. But he was always the reluctant, not reluctant hero, but he knew his limitations. He wasn't a natural the way Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson were. And Tim Drake understood that. And in the end, I think that's what readers responded to. They really related to him because they saw him growing into the role over time. And so, yeah, I was able to develop him as Ron, but I got to give credit to the guys that came before me who developed Tim Drake as a character, and I just extrapolated from what they did.
Well, I have to admit that two things. One, my wife, who's not a comic book reader, but she's subjected to this stuff all the time. She doesn't hate it. She's just, it doesn't interest her like it does me. But she would always say the same thing, like, I never liked Robin. I don't understand why Robin is like, he's so dark and brooding, and then you've got Robin. And I had my own ideas with, you know, what I would turn Robin into if I was handed it. But I just remember, I can't remember how old I was when I read that, but I was maybe early teens, maybe mid-teens or something. I can't remember exactly, but I just remember going like, oh, cool, holographic cover. It's a #1, you know, like a lot of kids do. And
well, I mean, Denny explained to me that it was a triumvirate of Robin and Alfred and Batman, and without Alfred and Robin, Batman's just a psychotic loner, and it becomes unpleasant over time.
Yeah,
and plus he has no one to talk to, so dialogue is harder. You know, and Batman's not going to keep a journal. You know, so we don't want to know his inner thoughts, and I don't think they ever use thought balloons with Batman. So like Spider-Man used so often. So, you know, this is the formula that worked. And it was weird because when Denny was telling me all this, I said, you know what, I'm thinking back, and all of my favorite Batman stories were Robin-centric. My favorite Batman story of all time, The Strange Costumes of the Batman, is essentially a Robin story. It's not a Batman story. And Robin Dies at Dawn, which happened when I was a kid. All of these, you know, great stories. There's a great story where Robin is melting away to dust in Batman's hands. It's a tremendous Neil Adams cover. And I thought, you know, you're right. The character's important, even though, you know, my fanboy self is denying it.
Well, I always kind of liked when Batman. I really thought that the original Batman animated series in the mid-90s was pretty darn successful at showing what I always imagined Bruce Wayne being, which, you know, he would smile. He would kind of, you know, go, you know, every once in a while he'd make a joke with Alfred. He was very grim as Batman, but as Bruce Wayne, he knew how to be charming and personable and
well, he had a very fatalistic signature sense of humor that was all his own. And because he could, I like the fact that, and the thing is, the animated guys worked with us very closely. They were often in the offices when I would visit. And so, you know, we were sort of developing Batman for the 90s in tandem. And we were, you know, taking a lot of their ideas, and they were taking a lot of our ideas. And, you know, Batman is an urban legend, things like that, sort of grew out of that collaboration. But, you know, I always liked that Batman or Bruce Wayne could make a joke that he knew was a joke, but maybe only Alfred would get or Robin would get. And if other people were in the room, wouldn't understand, Batman just made it funny.
It was definitely, I just, when I read that Robin series, it was interesting because I wasn't, like I said, when I read the Death of Robin, I think that was one of my first Batman comics, actually. Mm-hmm. And I had kind of the same thing. It's like, he's really kind of being irrational through this entire thing. And then when I was introduced to, you know, your Robin miniseries, I wasn't expecting much. I just, like I said, kids kind of get sucked in by it's a #1 and there's a hologram cover, and, you know, people go, oh, it's a collectible. But I really, I had to finish that. And then when you did the sequel to it, I think I remember there was a sequel. I'm not wrong about that. You know, it's like, I was like, oh, cool, sequel. Let's see what happens next. So I thought that was a really engaging take on Robin. And like I said, keeping a character like Batman fresh while still, you know, having his story arcs be informed by what came before. I mean, that must be extremely challenging.
Well, that's the fun of it. I like the challenge. I mean, comics are challenging to begin with. You know, how do I turn this idea, you know, that's either been handed to me or that I thought up on my own, how do I turn this into a comic book that engages and entertains? But, you know, I mean, it was, you know, like I said, I was the luckiest guy in the world that Denny reached out for me, and it all worked out. And Denny used to like it that I would sweat this stuff so much. He knew that if he gave me an assignment, I would, you know, stay awake all night, you know, working it out. You know, I never phoned it in because I couldn't do that. I couldn't phone it in and just, you know, look these guys in the eye.
So now let's switch subjects here, or not so much subjects. We're still on the subject of writing, but now like you said, you have your character Airboy, which I believe you brought back for new issues not too long ago, and you have your novels. What's that experience now that you've kind of you parted way with the big 2, and now you're in charge of your destiny and the destiny of your characters. Is it different? Or is it pretty much the same approach? Now you own them?
Well, I did a lot of creator-owned when I first got into business, because I did a lot of work for Eclipse and Epic, and they were all creator-owned companies, and a lot of the smaller indies. So I've always had a sort of a, work for hire, which is money now, and creator-owned, which is hopefully money in the future. And I've always taken those two tracks. But now it's all either creator-owned or something I have a piece in. Even when I adapt movie treatments, I insist on points, because I am part of the writing team. I'm solving problems for them as I adapt the work. I'm creating dialogue, so I always get points off of treatments. And that was my Levi Cade series and my Bad Time series were initially self-published, so I own them. And the Airboy work I'm doing now, I own as well. So I always urge anybody who works in this business who has any level of success with the big two, make sure along the way you create something your own as well, because you're going to need that for a rainy day.
Yeah, because you don't get to own Batman. You may have some good ideas in there or stories that people consider classics that people riff off of. Bane being the the one that stands out in my mind for you, but yeah, at the end of the day, you don't get to own that. That's what would you call it? Proprietary? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no job security in this business. As Jack Kirby once said, comics will break your heart. Which they will, but that's only if you let them. And I was never about to let them. So, I made sure I owned stuff or had participation in a lot of the stuff that I created.
Well, I think so far you've had an excellent career, and there's more stuff I want to ask you about, but I'm gonna save it for our post show.
Okay.
But for my Patreon supporters, but before we go, is there? Let's see. You've got the Avalon series at the moment. You mentioned your novels, which are available on Amazon right now, right? You want to tell us what they are, what's your favorite, where people can find them, all that good stuff.
Well, my Levi Cade series, I just finished the 6th novel. It kind of scratches my Punisher itch. Levi Cade is a Marine Corps veteran and hunter-killer counter-terror veteran. He's from Alabama, and he's always getting in trouble. He's got a young daughter that he's always looking out for. And I recently had him go back to Iraq, to Mosul to help fight ISIS because of a promise made to a friend. And in the most recent novel, he's trying to get his way home from being in a Turkish prison. So,
oh, wow.
So they're very much in a vigilante justice, one guy against everybody kind of mode. And my other series is called Bad Times, and that scratches my toy soldier fantasy itch. It's a time travel series about a group of U.S. Army Ranger vets who get involved in a time travel experiment that goes awry, and they travel to France during the Franco-Prussian War, the ancient Aegean, Roman Judea, and they eventually in the 6th book end up in the Cretaceous period.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Big action, gunfights, military battles, all kinds of crazy stuff happens.
Oh, well, the Cretaceous, that sparked something in me because I just finished up a visual effects piece for a Ray Bradbury project where I did Sound of Thunder.
Oh, cool. I love that story.
And it was just an animated backdrop. I didn't do the T-Rex because it was for theater, but you say soldiers going back into the Cretaceous period, that immediately made me think of Bradbury and hunting dinosaurs. Although I don't know if T-Rex was Cretaceous or not. I'm not up on my...
Yeah, T-Rex is Cretaceous. All of the Jurassic Park dinosaurs are actually Cretaceous era dinosaurs. But some idiot at the studio said, nobody's going to come see a movie called Cretaceous Park. Well, why did you think they'd come see one called Jurassic Park?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, until you tell people Jurassic means dinosaurs, they don't know.
I read that novel before they made the movie, but I know it was kind of like simultaneous. Like Crichton was working on the novel, and he told Spielberg about it.
Yeah. It was like a Jaws deal where they're working on the novel and the movie at the same time.
And it was, I think he even made a crack about it in the novel. Like he must have kind of thought it was ridiculous too. But I'm gonna have to go back and reread that one at some point.
And I'm sorry, but Cretaceous Park sounds a lot cooler.
Well, we can travel back in time and somehow put a stop to this.
There you go.
So, well, Chuck, thank you so much. And like I said, I'm going to have you stick around for a few minutes for the post show, which if
thing.
If Patreon, if you're not a Patreon supporter, I recommend it because we always kind of do like a little recap, a little more relaxed. But I am going to ask Chuck a little bit more about Bane. So thank you so much for listening, and I will be back with more interviews soon. I'm hoping to get David Lloyd. I've been talking to him, and there's so many great artists out there.
Very cool.
So, we're going to keep doing this. All right. Have a good one, everyone.